Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I think it is time to share my story. I'm 29 years old and this happened about 13 or 14 years ago. Back in the day, the soldiers who had been stationed here in Germany would go out to train in the woods. We would go there almost every day, checking the shooting ranges for bullets, shells, etc. Whatever we could find. Since my father is an American and I can speak English, I would talk to many soldiers, and often we would trade beer, chocolate for some MREs. In this forest there used to live a woman. We called her Waldhex. Guess you would translate it to forest witch in English. This woman lived in the woods for 25 years. The last thing I heard about this woman was that she got arrested by the police and is locked up in a mental asylum. We often talked to this lady and she would talk about random stuff that made no sense at all. She often talked about witchdominer. I have no clue what the English translation would be. Maybe some kind of dwarf, imp. Not too sure about it. She even showed us the clothing she sewed, crafted for them, and said it was some kind of tribute so that she can live peacefully in the forest. Judging by the size of the clothing, they had to be like a foot tall. Anyways, on this particular day, my two buddies and I decided to ride our bikes deeper into the woods just to explore and maybe find a new shooting range. In the distance, we saw a person sitting on a log beside the trail. My bud was like, that has to be the witch. Turned out he was right. As we got closer to her, she stood up and blocked our path. She was really angry and asked us what we were doing here. We told her that we just wanted to explore the woods some more. This is about the time I was a little creeped out. She started to talk weird stuff about crab and mention some kind of crab humanoids. At one point, we've had enough of her crazy stories and we kind of laughed it off. I said to her, well, maybe we will meet one of your friends along the way. We hopped back on our bikes, and just as I was going to pedal off, she suddenly grabbed my arm. It was a really tight grip she had on me, and with a kind of creepy smile she said, I warned you. I told her to screw off and let me go. We kept advancing deeper into the woods and joking about the things she said. We maybe did about, I'd say, 2 more kilometers until the trail was so bad it became impossible to ride a bike. We took a break and decided that we would turn around. All 3 of us were just sitting on an old log, and suddenly I got goosebumps. Even my eyes had gotten a little bit watery. I look over to Daniel and notice he has goosebumps too. Mark, my other friend who was with us, said, you guys feel that? We are being watched. Daniel is the type of guy who always goofs around, and I would have bet all my money in that moment that he would say something like the crab people are stalking us just to break the tension. But he didn't. Instead, he said with this serious tone, we should get out of here now. We were riding out of the woods at a really fast pace, and it felt like forever to get out of there. We have never really talked about it, not even after all these years. I have goosebumps writing this part of it. I was really scared that day. The silence was what freaked me out. You didn't hear a bird, a branch falling off a tree, nothing. Just this dead silence. Who knows what is out there?
I grew up in the farm country of Northern California. We lived outside of our little town in what I've heard is an old infirmary from World War II. There was a Japanese internment camp about 5 miles away. The floor plan made the rumor believable. Wide open long upstairs, 1 room downstairs, and the garage had a stable type feel to it. This is where I will try to align these pretty strange events. It was the mid to late 90s, and my stepdad, a Mexican-American, was hiding some illegal immigrants in our barn from immigration. They stayed there for a week until the heat came off. One guy was a Brujo witch doctor in Spanish. My mom, a Christian, was reluctant, but he was there. Within days they were talking about spirits and money being buried in the garage. My stepdad and miscellaneous friends of his started digging. I remember thinking they were crazy. That Brujo used sticks and other household items to try and find a spot to dig. They ended up finding 2 coffee cans full of World War II-era silver dollars. I remember my mom getting spooked and kicking that Brujo out of the property. Stepdad was scared of his abilities and didn't want him to go so unceremoniously. He got the boot nonetheless. I remember my parents trying to figure out how to cash in the loot. There was fear that the money had powers and they wanted to find a way to get them appraised. I was in my teens. I definitely don't remember every detail, but was aware enough to think we found a legit treasure. So my mom must have had enough of some unusual happenings since the coins had been found, and she decided to take the coins to town and get what she could for them. Along the way, my younger brother who was holding them opened the door to fix his seatbelt or something, and the whole jar had spilled out the door. They were only able to recover a few of them. Mom wasn't even tripping. She had more of a good riddance type attitude about it. My stepdad acted as if he lost the original copy of the Declaration of Independence. I figure they had to be worth quite a bit back then. Life went on and there was no more Brujo or anything abnormal for a period. This is when things kind of got really weird. My brothers slept downstairs in bunk beds at the bottom of the stairs. I had a room upstairs that overlooked the garage. One day my youngest brother was scared to his core that he saw a ghost from his bunk bed. We all kind of wrote it off, but he described a tall man in green fatigues with a glow around him. He swore to never sleep in those bunks again. And he never did. Fast forward some time and the brother right below me told an identical story. This time it was upstairs in the middle room. He swore to never sleep upstairs and he never did. I can't remember if these were months apart or years, but they slept in the living room for a long time. I mean, they were junior high kids when it happened to them, and they slept in the living room until the day they moved out of the house. They were scared and they saw something. They would go upstairs in the day with no fears. They'd play video games up there through the night, and they never slept up there again. So I left the house in 1998. I ran into some tough times and made my way back home in early 2000. My sister had the middle room and she kept it like a high school girl would keep a room, clean and smelling good. So they all slept downstairs still and I took over my sister's room. The night I came home, I fell asleep hard. At some point during the night, I awoke to this tall man dressed in army fatigues standing over me. He looked like a character from MASH. No face but tall and right there at the head of the bed looking at me. I thought it was a dream, so I closed my eyes and tried to fall back to sleep. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis or if this thing started choking me out, but I was getting choked out. I opened my eyes enough to see that ghost still there, but not on me in a full mount like it felt. Just there. I started to yell for my mom, but couldn't utter a noise. I tried to flail, but nothing. I was raised in the church, so I started to pray. I said something like, "I rebuke you in the name of God and His Son Jesus Christ." And it was over just like that. I went downstairs, took a drink of water, and knocked on my mom's door. I asked her if she heard anything. She says no, go to bed. I went back upstairs and went to bed. Never bothered again and moved out a few weeks later after I landed a job. Like I said, I'm more of a skeptic than a believer, but this happened to me and my brothers.
When great-grandmother Lucy was around 14 years old, bandits raided her family's small plantation in Mexico. They slaughtered everyone except her and a sister. They were separated and she was taken to their boss's hideout deep in the desert. The leader was an old woman who ran the bandits. The mysterious old woman needed a student to pass her knowledge. Why her? We may never know. For years she was trained in the ancient and dark arts of the supernatural until the day the old woman died. Lucy was 18 and left for Texas with the male leader of the bandits, the old woman's son. They made their home in the west and northwest regions of Texas. There she gave birth to her first son, who is my grandfather. There, she practiced and improved her skills. The sword from the beyond. My great-grandmother was given a sword by the old witch that was said to belong to a fallen god or something close to it. It was extremely deadly and was wrapped in a special cloth to hide its aura. Witches and the supernatural sought after its power for countless years. She was 18 and left for Texas with the male leader of the bandits. The sword was one of many relics she brought with her to Texas. The sword was like a spirit amplifier and drained a large part of your life force every time it was used. So one must already have unusually high spirit energy in order to use it. It could harm the intangible and unseen. It was used to cut a tornado in half and to save several homes. But it caused a bad drought that year, as she predicted. The use of the sword drew an evil presence to the town. One night, the house was attacked by a fire-like entity. The entity's light shined on the entire neighborhood like the light of the morning dawn. Around 20 people or so saw this entity. It smelled like sulfur and was circling the house that she lived in. Then, it jumped onto the roof and called her name. She came out and drew out the sword from its cloth. It demanded the sword and she refused. It charged her. She quickly swung the sword and cut it in half. Its body disappeared into the wind as ash. She became very weak and asked for the oldest grandchild, my uncle. The sword was shattered and its shards hidden through Texas and the nearby states. Battle in the graveyard. It was the middle of the night and Lucy was marching around in the house. She was very angry and then decided to leave, mentioning to someone she was leaving. She said that she was going to the graveyard and not to follow. My uncle, my mother, and a couple of my aunts waited several hours, then decided to follow her anyway. My uncle had the only vehicle and drove to the cemetery, which was several miles away. They parked the truck and crawled through the cemetery. Sounds of women yelling were echoing through it. The gang followed the source of the noise. There were two groups of women. One of the women, which was Lucy, and a local witch versus a large group of women in black. great-grandmother and the leader of the women were yelling in foreign tongues. Suddenly, the woman leader coughed up a long forked tongue and started chanting a spell. Lucy quickly raised her hand and gestured a breaking motion. The woman's neck broke and fell dead. One of the stunned observers made a sound. Lucy turned and looked at them. They all got up and ran to the truck and sped off. The pedal was hitting the floor. They were almost home when they saw a blue lightning-type flash speed past them. What the hell was that? Crossed their minds. They made it home to find Lucy was waiting for them. She scolded them for following her to the confrontation. They never did that again. No one knows how many battles she had with other witches and practitioners. It was widely known that Lucy had many rare artifacts that were deeply desired by negative forces. They constantly tried to obtain them when an opportunity arose. The giant bird. It was a time when great-grandmother was very ill and could not travel. So, her grandchildren drove her wherever she needed to go. One day during one of these trips they experienced a strange attack. It was in broad daylight when someone noticed a huge bird in the distance. That was one big vulture, they thought, until they got much closer. Suddenly, it spread its wings, which spanned the width of the road, and the body was as tall as a man. It seemed to them that they encountered a thunderbird, but it wasn't because the bird was wearing jewelry. They stopped the car, along with other vehicles on the other side of the bird. It approached their car and started to talk in Spanish. The words "Where are the books?" and "Give me the books" were heard. Other people who were coming to see why the traffic was being held up saw and heard the bird. They all fled in fear, including the local police. This distraction gave my aunt time to grab one of great-grandmother's mystery bottles and threw it at the bird. It splashed on the bird's face and it started to smoke. The bird started to scream and flew away. The puppet master. Before the time that Lucy's health took a turn for the worst, she had many contacts in scientific and medical communities through Dr. Pearl and his employers. Representatives from several pharmaceutical companies were known to visit Lucy at home. What was discussed and or exchanged was never known. There were many accounts of Lucy healing people with infections and maladies that baffled the local doctors. Yet, she dealt with Dr. Pearl in his eugenic experiments that killed dozens, if not hundreds, of women and children. It was strange that the research Dr. Pearl had accumulated vanished after his murder. Lucy kept quiet about her dealings with him. She once stated,
"Everyone who is alive today and tomorrow owes me their lives."
Was she a benefit to the human race or her test subjects? Did she actually influence the world in some manner? Lucy's powers. Lucy had several different abilities that were seen or known to the family and Dr. Pearl. Telekinesis was the backbone of her natural skills. She could teleport small items through walls and land them in front of her. She uses it to fight and kill her enemies. Flight was the second most used skill. She would use this to travel from place to place without anybody noticing. She couldn't drive or have someone drive her to locations quickly when called on. Some of the family witnessed her in action. My great-grandfather was hardly home and came back time to time to give her money. He gave her large sums of money that would last months or even years at a time. He was a well-skilled bandit and traveled all over the US and Mexico. He became extremely wealthy. The law finally caught up to him and he was killed. That is what she said. Yet, only a small portion of the money was ever recovered. He hid it very well and he always disposed of his gang after every heist. Lucy raised grandfather by herself. I don't know if she had a great hatred for his father or was just too busy, but she never taught her son to read or write. Yet, my grandfather was a hard worker and never gave up throughout his life. When he was a young man, he fell in love with a half-Irish, Apache woman at a flea market. It was love at first sight. She was not happy at all. She didn't want that bloodline to mingle with hers, but he still married her. Lucy wanted to punish them both and took years to plan. It was never known how it was done, but it worked. My grandmother became paralyzed and couldn't talk or move very well. She stayed like this till her death. The last moment before she died, she whispered to Lucy, "I forgive you." Right after that, Lucy fell ill with crippling pain. Her health too began to fail. Decades later, she was only able to move her eyes. I witnessed this myself before she died.
This is my retelling of an experience two close friends of mine had in Mumbai, India in the mid-70s during a riot against our spiritual, philanthropic organization there, whom I'll keep confidential for the anonymity of the members involved. This event included false accusations against our members, and the conjuring by Tantriks, black-hearted witches, of curses and ghost attacks on our compound there. This is a bit of a long story, partly because I sidetracked a couple times to other similar strange experiences we've had that help to understand what happened in Mumbai. I'm only able to repeat the events experienced by my two close friends BD and JD, who who were there in the midst of this paranormal siege. Some of these events may have involved more than one type of ghost, possibly including pisachas, Buddhas, or pretas over the course of a week or more. To start with, I had just gotten out of 3 years in the Marines, drafted, 1970, and wanted a very explicitly peaceful spiritual life. So I joined up with a philanthropic, traveling, progressive Hindu-based monastic group whose members were celibate, vegetarian, and didn't allow any type intoxication. We traveled around in the US, India, and many other parts of the world putting on presentations of the Vedic, ancient Indian, literature and sciences in colleges and other cultural settings. Spiritual life or not, I still wound up being a sort of bodyguard back then. My security role was needed because there were always folks we ran into that didn't like our spiritual point of view. According to them, we were either not Hindu enough, not Christian enough, or not communist enough, depending on what part of the world we were in. For the Hindus, we were a little too progressive. For instance, female members could become fully initiated Brahmin priests, not just the males. This was a first back then. Also, at that time in India, Westerners were often kidnapped and brutally interrogated by communist folks suspecting them of being CIA and sometimes never seen again. Back then, you could still see Russian-made trucks everywhere, moving at crazy speeds right down the middle of the dusty, sun-beaten highways, scaring bullock carts and rickshaw drivers out of the way. They always had festoons and colored ribbons flapping in the wind with corny slogans printed on the front of the trucks in big letters saying things like, "India, moving into the age of progress." The adobe-like residential compounds along the roadways would often have barbed wire along the tops of the walls and communist slogans tagged on the walls like graffiti. I wasn't in Mumbai when these things happened. I was in West Bengal with other members of the group, mostly busying myself with fighting off a serious bout of amoebic dysentery. But apparently there were several different horrific events in Mumbai that seemed to overlap, causing some to also believe it was curse-related. For starters, according to JD, he left the Mumbai compound with 3 other members of our group to head out for some shopping in the local Juhu beach markets for food that would be used for our daily functions. It was our practice to provide meals to the public, including a lot of hungry people, along with presentations on Vedic sciences and literature. We were trying to help the indigenous youth there to understand their spiritual and cultural heritage in the face of the cultural onslaught of communism. When the 4 of them were returning from their errands, they were, much to their horror, stopped by an angry crowd now seething outside the compound. JD told me that our already beat-up little Datsun 4-door we were driving got turned over, but only after some friendlies in the crowd helped us get clear of it first. When they made it on foot back inside the compound, they learned that the unhappy gathering in the street out front was because of the following. As with most places in India at the time, people would leave their shoes either on the porch, front steps, or in shoe slots before entering a building. Well, apparently, a few minutes before my friends tried to return, a shoe thief had stepped up from the crowded boulevard onto the entrance veranda and grabbed a really nice pair of shoes just as their owner was egressing the facility to reclaim them. The owner of the shoes in question saw the dacoit, in this case, shoe bandit, sneaking off with his nicer-than-normal shoes. He then shouted, pointing at the thief, to 2 or 3 nearby constables. A struggle ensued. The police at the time carried long sticks. Somehow in the melee, one constable's stick came crashing down on the thief's head, making a very graphically loud, messy, and lethal impact. The normally peacefully crowded street began to seethe. The police involved were helpless to deal with the growing disorder and simply left, taking the victim's body with them, presumably for an inquest. In the meantime, according to my other friend BD, the thief had friends in the crowd who didn't like Westerners, communist hang-ups about Westerners, even though many if not most of our members there were local people. They went to the police and somehow got them thinking that our organization was the real cause of the thief's demise. The police were of course happy to take this version of events, in spite of what they knew actually happened involving themselves. They even arrested some of our group's members, though they were released shortly afterwards. Right around this time other troubles also started up. Our property lease rather suddenly ran into legal trouble. 1 or more small fires broke out here or there in the facility. And seemingly fresh food would spoil rapidly. And then there were the ghost attacks at night. Much more on that in a second. However, also according to BD, the first of the troubles, involving at least one invoked entity, actually started a day or two before this time, when a 18 or 19-year-old local man joined our group as a full monastic celibate member. And, in BD's words, his parents had become very upset, most likely wanting him to get married and probably to someone of their choosing. They sought out a Tantrik who could give us troubles and thus cause their son to come back home. For at least the following week or more, disruptive crowds lingering outside shouted curses and tossed rocks at the building, some of them getting in through some of the unshuttered, open-air windows. When this sort of thing happens, the thrown objects are sometimes wrapped in cloth with Hindi curses written on them, though I'm not sure if that was also happening here. But at night in the compound, strange things and very troubled sleep overtook the members. One by one, just about all of the members' dreams while sleeping began to be invaded. They would for instance dream of seeing one of their good friends or co-workers there in normal happy ways working around the facility with them. Then suddenly that good friend would stab them in the back with a kitchen knife with a painful realness to it. Then upon seeing each other the next day they would be ill at ease with each other. That was just one specific type of ghost attack, and it happened frequently. As this seldom works against normal healthy people, but the ghosts would keep trying when the dreaming tactic didn't work because they were hungry for that type of experience. Then there is the worst type of attack. They begin by mesmerizing the dreamer. You may dream you are in a beautiful forest. Then you get the feeling that the trees around you are also dreaming, and that they are dreaming of being able to walk like you. It's a strange, fetching thought. And while you are caught up more in the dream, you are less in your body. The trees may then start to take on a gloomy or haunted look, then your chest feels gripped painfully and you're struggling to breathe. Another more common ploy I had experienced at our places in the U.S. was when the ghost would cause them to be fascinated in their dream by the idea of, it's just a dream, why not fly, or just float away, hence more out of your body. Then suddenly the suffocation struggle ensued. It can be particularly dangerous for heart failure in unhealthy people when it involves an invoked entity. I give an example in a sect that happened during the Mumbai siege. There were daytime apparitions too. One of them would put people on edge in the kitchen. Several times, when someone would open a pantry or cupboard door, there would appear a laughing, disembodied floating head that JD described. It looked like the zigzag man with the Robin Hood hat and goatee that looked like the logo picture on packs of rolling papers used by beedies and ganja smokers back then. For all these attacks the members used a pretty simple spiritual remedy which I'll describe in a sec when I relate a more horrific experience of one of the besieged members below. These people, my friends, are tough about this kind of stuff. They deal with all kinds of incorporeal intrusive phenomena everywhere they go in the world, Russia, South America, Indonesia, etc. It's like, just another day on the ranch, for them, like wildlife management here and there. In fact, we would normally rent the old Victorian homes in every city we traveled to that were once used as city morgues, because the leases were always a bargain. Of course the nightly ghostly botherations would start up in those places, and then we'd just fix it as described below. Back to Mumbai, in the one example referred to above, JD himself described waking up one night around 3:30 a.m. to a knocking on the door. It was the entrance to a large dormitory room where he and many others slept. But he felt uneasy about answering it. The building is locked after hours from the outside, and everybody inside knows that the inside dormitory door is unlocked for them to come and go on their own different sleeping schedules. Why then, would somebody be just knocking on it? So with an uneasy feeling, he got up to get the door. As he pulled the old wooden door open he saw a dark, faceless hooded figure standing there. It rushed him and he suddenly felt painful chest-clenching suffocation. Blacking out for an instant he then suddenly found himself waking up again in the sleeping bag. He realized he did not wake up and go to the door in the first place, though he was fully conscious of doing it. Now he was paralyzed on his back with his chest feeling painfully compressed and suffocating by a nondescript darkness over him. Reflexively, he employed our usual remedy. He did what we all had learned to do instinctively. JD said he reflexively started meditating on a single word mantra. Well, it was more like a sudden, panicky mental invocation actually. He fixed his mind on one of the many known, holy names of the Supreme which are found in many different scriptures around the world. He also needed to be more persistent than usual in this case since this was, after all, a more powerful, invoked entity attacking him. But doing this enabled him to break its hold. As soon as he could move and speak, he said the mantra out loud a few times. This has a more far-reaching effect in a given location than persisting with it in silence. Soon the attack was over, although, so was his sleep for a good while. He still felt the pain in his chest a bit. In JD's case, the mantra name he used was Nrsinga. Rama, Narayana or Krishna are also some of the more common ones used throughout India and many other areas of Asia. They are thought to be particularly powerful in shaking off demonic attacks as well as for clearing locations. It's said that the sound of the ancient seed syllables, or psychoactive sounds, that form many of the known, holy names of God, puts dark or evil entities into a state of mind we think of as grave, mortal fear, and they are forced away by it. It's also well known to the people who practice this type of defense, that correct pronunciation of these mantra names, or even particular faith in them are not necessary. Only sincerity is needed, and of course sincerity is pretty easy to muster in yourself when under fire. But it's a good thing to practice it, and bad dreams are a good place to start. You can actually see how the negative nature of a bad dream always changes in a sedating, pleasant way once your intention to use this kind of defense works its way into your dreams. As mentioned above, because of the kinds of locations we stayed in, we did this all the time. Back to the siege in a minute. We once rented one of those old Victorians in New Orleans that was previously used in the early 1900s as a city morgue, right across the street from the famous St. Louis Cemetery that has all the crypts raised above the ground. This became my own boot camp for this sort of experience. I was sleeping on the basement floor with maybe 10 or 12 other members nearby. Suddenly I woke up in a sitting position, except that I was above my body and I couldn't re-enter it. I knew something kicked me out. I could even see other friends sleeping nearby who weren't there when I went to sleep. I was in a strange state of panic and grogginess at the same time, as though the entity was trying to keep me unconscious or non-lucid. So I meditated on Nrsinga, my usual, and was able to drop back into my body and back to sleep pretty quickly. Suddenly I woke up again, in my body now, due to hearing other members being disturbed in their sleep. This entity was some kind of a classic crush your chest while you can't move type. And just as I would experience in so many other similar places in other cities since then, this entity moved through us one by one. I heard one person suddenly gasp for air 2 sleeping bags over from me, then in a flash that ended, presumably with that person's silent mantra meditation upon their waking up. Then a few seconds later somebody else a little farther away from me went through it. Then when there were enough frustrated attempts in this group, I started hearing these little disturbances from people sleeping on the floor above me, one at a time, until someone just woke up and chanted some of these mantra names for a few minutes out loud, and then it was all over for the night. But in the Mumbai case these events were obviously more involved because it was India, but it also involved a specific invocation against us of one or more summoned beings. It was likely either one or more of the Buddhas, human ghosts under the control of the Tantriks, typically including the ghosts of dead black-hearted Brahmin priests. A classic Pisaches may have been involved though they didn't present in their natural form in this case, but they don't need to. They are a non-human entity sharing some of the description and characteristics of the kinds of flying beings that have been reported in the Midwest U.S. in recently, big with dark skin in their own natural form, but they shape-shift and can be either physical or not. They are able to suck life energy from a human through their big red eyes without physical attack. That might be why similar beings with wings in America just fly around and shockingly stare at people a lot, without actually attacking. They are known to live in areas where high mortality from disease or battles are anticipated, so they can draw on the life force, prana or chi, that is released by violence or unexpected loss. In what I recall described as the final peak of the attack, one night there were multiple nerve-shattering manifestations. Sometime around 2 a.m. every alarm clock in the building suddenly sounded off at the same time. This was even though they were old-fashioned mechanical wind-up alarm clocks, most set at different times. At the same time, all the internally latched window shutters in the building began to fly open and slam repeatedly with horrific noise. Instinctively, various mantras were then heard from the mouths of startled sleepers. The horrendous cacophony stopped. A few of them were assigned to begin a bhajan, singing sweet melodies with these name mantras as they strolled through the building, while the main crew went back to sleep. They had to do this a couple more times as the trouble waned, and things gradually got back to normal again. Our daytime struggles described above also subsided as if in unison. BD told me that within a few days afterwards the mother of the young man who joined us against her will, the one who had engaged the Tantrik to summon the malefic beings against us, came to us asking for help. The normally stately-looking woman now looked really ragged. Apparently the entity was now attacking her and her family. However, since our members don't specialize in that particular Vedic science, they patiently explained how they themselves had overcome it. We never heard back what the outcome was for her. When we got back to our usual leased old flats in Midtown Manhattan, New York, I didn't know this stuff had happened yet. I was busy trying to discontinue looking like a skeletal prisoner of war victim due to continuous fasting due to deal with my amoebic dysentery in Bengal at the time. My main activity now that we were back in New York was eating stacks of 4 or 5 plantain pancakes as big as the plates they were on along with other wholesome things until I started looking recognizable again. It was around that time that I heard from my friends about the Mumbai siege. In fact, we were always hearing reports of these types of misadventures coming into our New York office from our members around the world. But this one seemed kinda up there to me, and it also involved my good friends. JD had repeated it a couple different times to me over the years, including in front of others who were there, and the details were always the same. I had only heard BD's story of his experience there once. Their stories showed me that they were just different experiencers of the same strange ordeal, and didn't show any inconsistencies.
When I was 14, me and my brother and 4 friends, we saw some type of witch. We had a friend and 2 girls stay over. That's kind of exciting to have girls stay over when you're 14. One of the girls wanted to do a seance, but I come from a Christian home and I believe in God. But, you know, kids wanting to be curious, dabbling in everything. This neighborhood, there were vacant lots, so we went into a vacant lot. She draws a circle, 5 dotted stars. We get around the circle and she begins to spell out things. It was a joke, you know. We ended up walking afterwards and it was like a big cul-de-sac. So we get around the bend, going up the hill, coming back down. One of the girls, her name was Michelle, noticed something on top of the hill. So we all looked back and all we saw was a dark figure. I didn't see any wings, nothing like that. It was just a huge dark figure. And we began to run, and when we turned around, it stopped. It was kinda like it was playing with us. It kinda reminded me of that movie Jeepers Creepers, that creature that was just toying with the kids. It kinda reminded me of that. Well, we got around the bend. I didn't see any red eyes. When we got to my house, back onto my road, we began to taunt this thing, and that is when we definitely saw the red eyes. It was a huge dark figure, but we couldn't see any wings or anything like that, but we saw red eyes and it was huge. We began to taunt this thing and there was a streetlight that was fixed on our road. This creature went from one side to the other while it was in the light. Like it was seeing itself in the light. That's what scared us and made us run into the house. We woke my mom up, and after that we stayed in the house from that point. I only tell this to my family, to my wife and my kid, because it's amazing. This all started when Michelle did the seance.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.